We need to build a proper fuel system for my 1998 2.5 RS that we are turning into a 22B P25 STI swapped RSTI Frankenstein car. I don't know what to call it at this point. So on the table, I've got everything we need to properly set up a quality fuel system here. Now, there are a ton of ways to wire up pumps and install pumps and all these different ways. So the way I'm gonna be showing you, I guess I'd lean more towards on the side of this being a little bit more of a bougie setup, but it's a very proper setup that will not give us any issues with the fuel system. I have installed a handful of these different fuel setups in different cars. I've kind of learned what works and what works best for my applications. So I'm gonna show you guys the most proper way to install a dual radium hanger or a triple, or however many. This is pretty applicable to pretty much any car you're gonna be wiring a fuel pump hanger for pretty much anything out there. First thing we need to do before we get to any of the wiring is actually set up our fuel hanger. So this is a Radium dual fuel hanger for a 93 to 07 Subaru Impreza WRX STI. This is going to house two Walbro 450s. Keep in mind that these pumps are sold separately when you do buy these from Radium. Back in the day, they used to send these out pre-installed with pumps and everything like that, but they stopped that not too long ago. So if you don't know how to set these up, I mean, it will vary from hanger to hanger for what you get from Radium. I know I have a Radium hanger in my RX-7 and it assembles quite differently than this because it has a built-in surge tank to it. So keep in mind, if you need to look up the instructions on how to actually install your fuel pumps and everything like that, please do so. So that way you don't make a mistake setting up at least the hanger side of things. That should slide off. Looks like that guy will slide out, and then that guy kind of slides out. Now the whole reason that you would use a hanger setup like this is if you're trying to make obviously more power. That is the whole kit and caboodle here for why you would use one of these. One pump's gonna sit on one side, obviously the other pump's gonna sit on the other side. So now that we have kind of these open, we can set them aside for just a second. And then on the bottom of this hanger here, we're gonna see a fitting up here, and that's gonna be the secondary feed for this second fuel pump. So if you're only using one pump, you would leave that plugged. If you're using two, we're gonna take that out and swap it for the provided fitting from Radium. So we can snake in here and take out this guy. Just take out the plug. Before we shove this new one in here, something I do advise is on the O-ring on the bottom of these fittings, just lube them up a little bit. Just a tiny little bit of oil, WD-40, something to help them seat in there. Otherwise you can tear the O-ring. Stubby wrench. They want the tubing going onto the fuel pump first. Now before we do that, we are gonna put on one of these little hose clamp dealios. Here, just kind of should just kind of slide right on. We have both of the hoses on. They actually do want us to put the filters on these pumps. So I guess that's what we're gonna do. And it looks like they're just gonna fold down in half over or inside of the little fuel basket that they sit in, which I find a little bit interesting. Find that a little bit odd, but. They want the electrical connector on the back side and the barbed inlet on the inside. So keep that in mind when you're about to put these on. Heat this back up. Go up and on. Now we've got our two fuel pumps just kind of chilling down here. This first green bracket should slide up and over. And honestly, I feel like once we get these on, we can kind of set the height for where the fuel pumps are. We've got the actual fuel pumps being held down now. I might drop this one down a little bit just so it sits perfectly flush with that. But right now, actually no, I might leave them offset so that way these filters have a little bit more room to maneuver around in here. So we can actually get the other ones back on now. In their instructions, that's how they showed it. It was just kind of like folding those in half, like a taco. like you kind of have to leverage the screw in first and then tighten it all down. It will go together. I'm not too keen on having the fuel pump socks crushed like they are, but I trust Radium. They know what they're doing with fuel setups and stuff, so if they say it's fine, I will trust them. And just like that, our fuel pumps are now installed into our hanger with our feed lines. Like I said, that kind of sucked, but you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. So I have pump 1 plugged into the original wiring that came on the hanger here, and I have it tucked behind these hoses here. When installing this, you wanna try to keep everything inside of this hanger assembly as you can, because this is gonna be a real pain in the booty hole to get into the fuel tank. So fair warning, it does kind of suck. They give you a little bag of hardware, eyelets, acorns, heat shrink. We need 2 of the 10mm normal nuts, and then we're gonna wire up the other jumper cable that they give us to pump 2. If you look at the top of the hanger, it'll label everything for you for where they go, what they do. So pump 2 is gonna be this guy down here. So you're gonna match obviously positive and negative to whatever stud they're gonna go to on that. And when you install these and you tighten it all down, make sure that these are not touching. I had that happen in my RX-7 and it kept blowing the fuse for the fuel pump, and I'm gonna be honest, it's quite annoying to have to deal with that, because then you have to take all of this back out to get to the bottom of this hanger assembly to be able to fix that. I've got the second wire coming out for the other. Everything's inside the hanger. That's what we want. Like I said, it's a bit of a pain in the butt to keep it all in there, but it's there. I guess before I get too much more deeper in this, we can go ahead and put the new gasket on. If your old gasket is still serviceable, by all means, use it. I did not even have a gasket for this. This way I don't have to worry about this later, and the gasket will already be installed. Because like I said, I did not even have a gasket for this since we're doing a swap. With our fuel hanger assembly done, we've got the pocket on the bottom. Both of these guys are still free floating to allow fuel to go in and out of the bottom of the hanger here. We have 2 Walbro 450s installed here. Both the feed lines going up, the electrical connections plugged in. All we have left to do is put on the fuel level sensor. And with the fuel level sensor, I'm gonna need a second person to help me install that, because one person's gonna have to hold this in the fuel tank while a second person comes on the backside and screws that in. Also, don't forget your new gasket or old gasket. Put a gasket on your fuel pump hanger assembly, because you don't want to leak fuel out everywhere. Maybe you do. I don't know. I don't know you. Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. Leak fuel. Leak all of. Don't leak the fuel. Don't leak fuel. Now, since we're already doing a whole bunch of fuel stuff on the Subaru, it's a good time to talk about our video partner, our guys over at Chevron and their Techron Complete Fuel System Cleaner. Also run a lot of E85 on all the cars. Now with E85, it's a pretty corrosive fuel, and I always suggest running pump gas once every 4 or 5 tanks when you are using pure ethanol. And whenever we swap to that tank of pump gas, we always throw a bottle of this stuff in. However, today, this is going in my daily driver, my Tacoma. Now, if you feel like you aren't getting the fuel economy you should be, or you're not getting the power that you felt like you used to have, it honestly could be from a dirty fuel system. And this is where this stuff comes in clutch, because it doesn't require you to obviously remove and clean a lot of stuff. It does all of that for you. Pop off the little silver cap. This is, okay, you know what, that works, that works. We got a hole in it now. Make sure that you do have a full tank of fuel, or if you're at the fuel station, put this in and then fill up your tank. It will help mix this into the fuel. I am just pouring it in because I literally just got gas in the truck, so I already have a full tank. Once the bottle's empty, put the cap back on it and you can toss this in the trash. Now for something like this normal truck or your normal daily driver, I would advise tossing in at least one of these bottles every oil change. It's an easy thing to do. You're changing your oil, tossing a bottle of fuel system cleaner. It's a really easy schedule to get on top of to be able to keep your fuel system clean. The Subaru is actually going to be getting one of these as well, because that fuel tank that we put in that car is used. So while the hanger and the pumps and all the lines and everything are brand new, if there's any gunk on the inside of the tank, we're going to get that flushed out. We've been using Techron in all of the cars for years. That is rotary and premix safe. We've been using it in our Tune GTI. We've been using it in the Subarus. Every single one of our vehicles has used fuel system cleaner, and we have been more than happy with it. Fuel system cleaner can also help remove any gunk that may be stuck on your fuel level sensor that could be causing it to read inaccurately. Trust me, I've had it fixed on the 911 when I had that car acting up and being all weird with the fuel level sensor. It fixed it, no issue. Once again, huge shout out to our partners over at Techron. If you guys are interested in this stuff, there will be a link down below with more information, and you can pick this up locally at pretty much any Chevron fuel station that is near you, or any auto parts store, for the most part, will carry this. So with that, let's get back into this fuel system on the Subaru, because we're just full of fuel system stuff today. Now, with wiring this up, there's a handful of different ways you can do it. You can buy Radium's install kit. It works. It's a little messy in my opinion, and things can be done cleaner. So if you're gonna go the DIY route like I am, there's a couple things you have to keep in mind. With these fuel hanger assemblies, you have to know what fuel pump you're using. If it's a Walbro 450, a 535, a 525, an AEM 340, whatever the pump may be, you need to look up the chart for that fuel pump to find out how many amps it's drawing at a certain pressure. I believe for these Walbro 450s, off the top of my head, it pulls about 23 amps at 120 PSI per pump. So each pump's gonna be drawing about 23 amps. You can't just grab any gauge wiring and wire this stuff up and hope that it works, because you're gonna be popping fuses. So since we are building our own fuse box for this fuel pump assembly, we need to keep that in mind. So for the wire gauge for these fuel pumps, we are using a 14 gauge wire. 14 gauge wire should be rated to about 25 amps, I believe off the top of my head, at a specific length. That we do not exceed that length. I'd have to pull the chart back up. I'll put it right here so that way you guys can see what I'm talking about. So 14 gauge wire is going to be the feed power from the fuse box to the pump assembly. Now, from the battery to the fuse box, we have to keep in mind that we're running two of these Walbro 450s, so it's not going to be drawing 25 amps to the fuse box. It could be drawing up to 50 amps to the fuse box. So we have to take that combined amperage rating and figure out what gauge wire we need. For us, I want to say this is 8 gauge, which is going to be feeding the fuse box its power. So on the back side of this fuse box, I really like these. These are from Race Spec, and they're pretty affordable at like, I want to say it's $100, and it comes with all the relays, all the fuses, all of the grommets, all of the terminals, everything you're gonna need to be able to build this thing. So there is a power stud on the back side of this fuse box that will feed the relays and the fuses, so that way it eliminates some more wiring that you're gonna have to go from this box to the battery. So it cleans things up a lot more. So when it comes to setting up the relays, there's a couple different ways you can do it. Since we are using a Haltech R3, our relay is controlled by a DPO, which is a digital pulsed output. It's essentially a switched ground. So the fuse is going to be controlled by a switched ground from the ECU. Now the way I'm going to set this up is each fuel pump is going to be on its own switched ground. So if we are running the car and we only want one of these Walbro 450s running, it's only going to trigger one of them. And then we'll say that we want the second fuel pump to come on at 20 PSI of boost. The second fuel pump will kick on, and that will give us the fuel that we need. So you have to keep that in mind. There's a lot more that goes into kind of setting up a fuel pump like this versus just like a drop-in hanger with stock wiring or something along those lines. So when it comes to doing this, do your research. I'll link down below some different resources for you guys for wire gauge sizing, amperage draw for length of wiring, the different specifications for the different fuel pumps. So let me actually go ahead and get one of these relays wired up first. I'll walk you guys through the second one, but they're really not too bad. Don't be too intimidated by wiring. I know it looks scary, I know it sounds scary, but I promise it's pretty straightforward. So I've already got part of the fuse box done. We've got one of the relays installed. This is a 35 amp relay. You do need to make sure that the relay amperage is rated for what you're gonna be using. A 25 amp for the power supply. So if you look on the back side of this, we've got 3 wires coming out of this. We've got this jumper, and this is feeding from the fused 25 amp side over to the relay side to power the relay. We've got this smaller 20 gauge wire, which is our switched ground from the ECU. And then we've got this 14 gauge wire that is to the pump. So this is power supply to the pump. So there's a couple different ways you can figure out what wires are gonna go where if you build a fuse box or if you do a standalone relay. So because I'm obviously using a Haltech, I'm using one of my old Haltech documents here that kind of shows how to set up the relay for what we're using. Now, if you're using a 12-volt source to trigger the relay and not a switched ground to trigger the relay, then you're gonna set this up a little bit differently. But I mean, you can set it up either way. It's really just how are you triggering this relay to send power to the fuel pump. For us, it's a ground instead of a 12-volt source. So I'll walk you guys kind of through how to set this up real quick. So the first thing that we're gonna do is go ahead and grab our jumper wire. So I've already pre-cut this to the same length that I cut the other one, and I set a whole bunch of these terminals aside for what we're gonna be using them for. So with this, the easiest way to do this is obviously flip this over, grab your relay, and then on the bottom side of every relay, you guys are not gonna be able to see it. They are labeled for what pin is what. So if I look at our Haltech relay here, and I set this up here, I can see that pin 86 lines up with one of the power studs already internally built into the box. So pin 86 on our Haltech document, that is from battery positive. So we know that that is battery positive. Straight across from that one, we have pin 30. Pin 30 is going to go to the fused spot. So right next to that, we're gonna connect the fuse and the relay together with our jumper wire. So when doing this, I like to put the little weather seal connectors on first, or the little weather seal grommets on first, so that way I don't have to fight with them after I've already stripped the wire back. Now all of this wire that I'm using is Tefzel wiring, so it may look a little bit thinner than what you guys are used to. It's got a smaller sheathing and more internal wire. It keeps the wire a lot more compact and small. Give her a good old crimp down, and then that should be what you are left with right there. So it is holding onto this rubber grommet as well as the wire that's going to keep this grommet from sliding off and keep everything nice and secure. I'll link below these crimping pliers too. I wouldn't suggest like an AutoZone set or something. It might work, but I've never been able to get reliable crimps out of them. There are specific tools for doing electrical work like this. These ones in particular are from Haltech, but it's a pretty universal tool. I'm pretty sure that they just resource it. So with this, we need to look at the front of this. We are going to skip one and go down to F3 here. Feed the wire into the back side until it clips in like that. There we go. So now we've got the other jumper wire going across, feeding. So it's feeding from the fuse to the relay side now. So now we need to add in the outboard wire, which is gonna go to the fuel pump like we did on this one, and the switched ground for the DPO. Pin 85 is the fuel pump trigger, which is the DPO. So that is going to go on the outermost side right there. When I first started doing this wiring stuff, all of this just looked like black magic and science to me, and I did not understand any of it. But once you do this like once or twice, you kind of get the hang of it, and it's not as bad as you might think. There is an orientation that these connectors will go in, so if it doesn't feel like it's going in, don't force it. There are two more additional wires that we are going to need to add to this, and that is going to be the feed wires from the battery to the fuse box. And that's what we were talking about earlier, where we had to combine the amperage between both fuel pumps into it. Are you too good for your home? There we go. There's not too many wires coming off of this. We can go ahead and put the relay in. Don't put the relay in upside down because you totally can, and that's the last thing that you want to do. We've got our relay in. We can go ahead and put our fuse in here as well. Bam. So now we've got fuel pump 1, fuel pump 2, fuel pump 1, fuel pump 2. Now on the, oh hello wire. On the back side of this, like I said, we need to actually add wire to these power studs here. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to take this 8-gauge wire I have right now. I'm going to find the center of it. I'm just going to cut it in half. I think this is 10 feet, so that gives me 5 feet to be able to play with for mounting this thing up, which I know I'm not gonna end up using all of this, and I don't think I have any other use for this, so it'll be fine. Now what we need to do is hook up these two wires here to these two power studs on the bottom, which I need to find some ring terminals for these because I actually don't know if I have any. Oh yeah, that seemed to work way better. So at this point, we have a technically usable fuse box. This is going to be mounted in the trunk. We've got our battery cables here. I'm gonna connect these to one terminal at the end that's just so we only have one single mounting point to the battery, so we don't have two. And then these, so we've got our smaller 20 gauge black with white stripe wire here. That is our DPO control from the ECU. That's our switched ground to turn on the relays. These two bigger 14 gauge are the power wires going to the fuel pumps to power them. We also have 14 gauge black that is going to be the ground, so we are going to have to integrate that in somewhere, so that way we have a ground wire going from the battery also to the fuel pumps in the back of the car. So let me actually do a little bit of cleanup on this, clean up all the wires, get everything looking all pretty, and then we can start mounting this, get our fuel pump hanger in the car, and get this all wired up. With our fuse box all cleaned up and our hanger ready to go, we can get these installed, because we can't finish wiring this until we get this in the car. Now, I did go ahead and swap out the feed and return on the pump. The feed is a -8, the return is a -6, and the crossover tube going to the other side of the tank is just the factory slip-on point. So with this, we need to get this hanger in and then install this, which I'm gonna be honest is a real pain in the butt. It is doable, but I have my neighbor next door, so I'm gonna see if he can come over and help me with this. I would just go in. I mean, you can go in if you want. It's up to you. Because this, I just need you to hold it like that for me. What in tarnation? Oh, there we go. There it is.
Got it.
So I just made this little template to be able to cut a hole in the car to fit this in. So if you look, there's actually a radiused edge that is raised going around this. So this is going to slide in from the backside. Now you do need to make sure that these power studs are not going to touch whatever is behind it, because that's the last thing you want. It's going to short out the entire fuse box. Don't do that. So I've made this template. I'm going to mount it right up there. It's going to be kind of out of sight, out of mind, near the battery, near the fuel pump hanger. There is more real estate on this side over here. However, I think I would prefer it to be there. It's going to be easily accessible also. So let's cut into my freshly painted trunk. I've got the fuse box mocked up in its home. Please keep in mind when I show you this is not final assembly. I have to order some weather seal and everything like that, but the fuse box is gonna live right there. I've got 2 of the 1024 screws holding down the fuse box where it's gonna be, but I just needed that mocked up so that way we can figure out wire lengths and whatnot. So I almost actually made that long enough to be able to reach the fuel hanger there. So what we need to do is run 2 wires off of that for fuel level, 2 wires for fuel pump 1 positive and negative, and then 2 wires for fuel pump 2 positive and negative. So let me get these kind of ran. How you decide to run this is going to be totally up to you. It will vary from setup to setup, but let me get mine situated and I'll kind of give you a walkthrough of how I have it set up. Pretty much wired out here. It's a little bit odd with this setup because I had to run the fuel level sensor wiring into this as well, and then obviously the DPO. So there's gonna be wires that run back here to that. I wish I could have kind of integrated them all into one harness, but it just wouldn't work out that way. I could do a 4-plug here, have it plug in there, and then run to that one, but I feel like that'd be a little bit pointless and a little bit silly. So what we got going on here, we've got our fuel pump positive and negative, fuel pump positive, negative, fuel level sensor positive, negative, coming out into one singular harness here, wrapping up. These are the 2 power wires that are gonna run back to our relay box that we built back there. The 2 DPOs that will trigger the relays will run into this as well. Coming out, we've got our battery ground and then our fuel level sensor here. So with this this is a battery ground. This is not a chassis ground. Granted, it is going right here. This wire goes directly to the negative terminal of the battery. So this will suffice for our fuel pump ground, for right there. Cleaned up, this is what we're looking like. Wires come out of the top, go to our connector, go into the fuse box, our battery ground, and then our fuel level sensor there. I feel like that's pretty cleaned, especially once all these wires are actually fully installed. I think it'll be pretty minty. Just to go over this one more time with you guys, we have our fuse box up here that houses our relays and our fuses. That main power wire comes down to right here. That's gonna connect up to the bottom side of our circuit breaker here to give power to this. Then we have the smaller harness that comes out and goes to our actual fuel hanger assembly down there, which feeds power to the pump. We then have the secondary wire that comes up that'll ground to our battery ground and chassis ground here, and then our fuel level sensor right there. Ooh, wow, brother, my forehead's massive. Now, if you already have your car set up with the factory wiring that already has fuel level and all that already ran to it, by all means, use it. Don't do what I'm doing for the fuel level. I'm using a digital dash in this car, and I have to hand wire in my fuel level sensor. So that is the whole point of why I just did that. So I'm stoked with how this came out. It looks very clean. I ordered some little trim to go around where we put our fuse box. I also had to order some Dremel accessories to be able to make the hole just a little bit bigger, but for the purpose of this video and just getting it mocked up where it is, it worked out perfect. So I will link down below that fuse box. That is all I've got for you guys on this one. If this video helped you at all, even just explain how to assemble these hangers or how to do the wiring, go ahead, hit that like button, turn it black, blue, green, yellow, purple, silver, cyan if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to be able to put it in one of these corners. No idea which one quite yet, but with that, I will catch you guys in the next one. So peace out, homies.